In today's Gospel reading from the Daily Lectionary, we read two stories set in parallel to one another through Mark's use of a technique we have already seen. It's the technique scholars call insertion. There's a main story that is interrupted by a second story before returning to the main story, a technique in which each story helps interpret the other. Both of these stories today are healing stories, but they really serve to underline Jesus' authority over disease and even over death. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas, and this is your daily devotional for Monday, January 23rd, 2023. The main story concerns the young daughter of one of the leaders of a synagogue, perhaps the synagogue in Capernaum, though that's not told. It begins with the man, whose name is Jairus, begging Jesus to come heal his sick daughter. When Jesus begins to follow him, a crowd collects around him as he heads towards the man's home. Now comes the insertion. A woman who had suffered from hemorrhages for many years reasons that she only needs to touch Jesus' clothes, and if she does, she'll be healed. Now, keep in mind, a woman with a flow of blood in Jewish law was considered unclean. That she touched his clothing, then, would render Jesus himself unclean. But she touches his clothing anyway, and he somehow senses that power has gone out from him. Turning to see who had done this, he asked the crowd, "Who touched me?" The disciples saw this as a bit of a daft question, since the crowd is just milling around him, jostling him. But the woman fesses up with fear and trembling. But instead of scolding her, he pronounces that her faith has made her well, and that she may now go in peace. Now we get back to the first story. Just then, people from Jairus' home come to tell them that the girl has already died. Now the story moves to its climax. Jesus tells them not to worry, that she's only sleeping. This is where we pick up the climax and the end of the story. When he had entered the home, he said to them, "Why do you make a commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. Then he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, get up." And immediately the girl got up and began to walk about. She was 12 years of age. At this, they were overcome with amazement. He strictly ordered them that no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat. Two things are happening here that are especially noteworthy. First, Jesus returns to his regular habit of telling the people not to tell anyone what had happened. This is the so-called messianic secret, the command, at least among the Jews, not to say anything, at least for now. The reason will become obvious later in the gospel, but until then, this pattern persists at the end of nearly all of his healings. The one exception we've seen so far, we saw on Saturday, when Jesus cast demons out of a man from the region around Gerasa, but this was a non-Jewish area. Now that Jesus had returned to the region on the west side of the Sea of Galilee, a Jewish area, the messianic secret pattern comes back into play. And so for now, what he has done is supposed to remain a secret. Whether most people obeyed him in this is debatable, but there it is. The second thing to notice here is the end of the final sentence. After he tells them not to say anything to anyone, he told them to give her something to eat. That's maybe the more significant thing that happens here. It's significant because it is so completely mundane. As parents, of course they would provide her with food. But because she has just risen from death, her parents would have been so completely gobsmacked that they could easily have forgotten. It's easy to get lost in the moment, and so easy that we forget to take care of the most basic things. Perhaps he had to remind them because they might have thought she was some sort of ghost. but he had to remind them that she is still a living, breathing human being. Ghosts, after all, do not eat. But little girls who have come back from the dead do. She would need sustenance, just like any other flesh and blood, living, breathing person. Feeding my child after she had just been raised from the dead would probably be the last thing on my mind. But it is Jesus' way of gently reminding us that it is really and truly a life come back once again. The girl is alive. Tomorrow, Jesus goes home to Nazareth, where he finds a less than friendly homecoming. But for now, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.